Welcome to the Missouri Wind and Solar Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Shank, and I'm here today with our co-host and general manager, David McDarris. Each week, we review the latest, greatest happenings in wind and solar and how they impact you and your alternative energy projects. If you'd like to know more information about anything you hear on the podcast, check out all of our educational resources at windandsolar.com, including links to over 300 of our YouTube videos, or feel free to reach out to our Seymour, Missouri-based sales team at 417-708-5359, and you can always email them at sales@windandsolar.com. If you really want to get in depth, come to our hands-on workshop in Seymour, and you can get all of those details on our website, windandsolar.com. How about it, David?
It's all good right now.
All right. So on this episode, we want to talk about a particular interesting subject, which it's not all about the amps.
Yes, that is correct.
So I know this has been a particular bee in my bonnet, is that we see on a lot on the websites, a lot on the like Facebook and everything, where we have these pretty heated comments about, well, my wind turbine is only putting out 2 amps, and as you and I have talked, we need to kind of dial that back and explain why you're only giving half of the equation there.
Correct.
So let's talk about that, David. What is happening in a wind turbine? And I guess for starters, why are people getting so focused on just the amps?
Because they're used to battery chargers. Battery chargers are all rated in amps. And so when they're putting their wind turbine to their batteries, they're wanting to see the amperage high like they would on a battery charger, maybe 20 amp or 30 amp or whatever the case may be. But what they have to realize is on battery chargers, on most battery chargers, you're doing for one, you're coming from the grid, right, where there's sustainable high voltage. It bucks it down to the 12 volt. When it comes down to 12 volt and it regulates that 12 volt, it has a regulator that actually gives it just the voltage that it needs, and it regulates that voltage. It's very easy to produce that high amperage. Now, at 12 volts, if you're giving it 20 amps, you're giving it 240 watts. That's the math of it. That's the other side of the equation. It's voltage times amperage equals wattage. And so what they're not taken into account when you're using the wind turbine, and this always comes to be the case when they're using our higher voltage turbines, our 48 volt turbines, and charging those high voltage battery banks. At that point, if you took that same equation where that same charger was going to give it 20 amps at 12 volts, you got to divide that by 4. So you'd be giving it 5 amps. But 5 amps at 48 volts is still 240 watts. It's all about wattage. It's not about amperage. It's about wattage.
So that kind of led me to, I was having this conversation the other day with Crystal, of saying what's unique about this situation is that the wind turbine can put off a wide variety of voltage, right?
Yeah, that's saying our wind turbine is only giving that it has a buck in it that's bringing it right down to the 48 volts. That's not the case.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second. So a wind turbine, like a 48 volt wind turbine, can run up to, how much voltage can it run up to?
Oh, it can exceed 250 volts.
Okay. And so that's where we come back and we talk about the MPPT.
Correct.
Is basically looking at that and deciding how to convert that around, right?
Right. And that's why we have to use the clipper-like device, or VRD, because it can exceed 250 volts. And on your classic VRD or your classic controllers, you cannot exceed 250 volts input. It voids your warranty. You're not allowed to do that. And it can damage the controller. Not just does it void the warranty, it can damage the controller. So that's where the clipper-like device has to come into play. There's the clipper that's made by Midnight. We make the VRD, does the same process. And it controls that high voltage coming in because, Wes, I know on your system, for instance, I know that you've seen it. It will have done that. Your VRD will have enacted. I was there one day when it did enact. And the reason it does that is because it's going to try to exceed the 250 volts. So that 250 volt input, let's just say it was And it starts at the VRD kicks in about 230 volts. So it won't allow it to jump over. So we don't want to run so close to the line of 250 volts. At 230 volts that it was coming in, if it was coming in at 230 volts and it was giving you just 5 amps, well, now it's 5 times 230. So now I'm at 1,150 watts. I mean, it's, and that deal is, it wouldn't have been just at 5 amps. It would have been probably, there again, I've seen the data on your actual midnight. There's been times that it's exceeded 2,400 watts. And so that would have been at about 230 volts. That thing was been producing almost as much as that controller could have handled.
So let's talk about that for a second. So what does it do then? So you get that high voltage spike coming in.
Mm-hmm. You get the high voltage spike coming in. And so that's the magic of the MPPT. At that point, it actually through a set of resistors and everything that's built into this unit, the algorithms it has, and the actual wind program that you program in it. At that point, it says, okay, at this amount of volts, I want you to give this amount of amperage. And so that keeps the turbine from stalling out. That's the main reason we have to have the wind curve in there. It would just stall it out if not. It would just immediately.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, what it would do is it would try, let's say your battery bank was depleted, maybe 50%, maybe it's overnight.
And this is, this happens at night.
It happens at night and gets down to about 50%. And then all of a sudden, the wind comes blowing the next morning, wind ramps up and it really gets to blowing. If there's not a wind curve that said only give it this much amperage, basically only put this much load on it, it would take, because the battery banks were in bulk and needing as much energy as possible, it would try to take everything it could out of that wind turbine to the point that it would put too much excessive load on the turbine and stall it out. It would just literally stop turning. I mean, it would just like when we turn the brake on, we're putting excessive load on the turbine. When the VRD kicks in, that's what it's doing, is it's putting excessive load on the turbine and slowing those blades down so it can't produce the over voltage. And it would do that without the wind curve programmed in it.
So what would the wind turbine do?
The wind turbine, literally the blades would just slow down to a very minimal spin rate. The RPM.
Well, but then your everything drops off, so your voltage drops off.
The voltage would drop off, and then it would
ramp up again.
Try to ramp up again, but you would just constantly. Wes and I are both of the age, and cars may still do it. I don't know. I don't drive that fast anymore. But back in the 90s, the Chevrolet pickups, when you would mash the accelerator to the floor, it would get to a certain speed and it would cut off. And it let off. And then but if you just held it to the floor, once it fell off to a certain point, and it'd go right back in. It just like a governor, basically. And so that's what would happen on these wind turbines.
You drove a lot wilder than I did, apparently.
Maybe I did. Anyway, so that's the same thing that would happen here. And it would act like a governor. It would take it to the max and then it would kill it for a bit. And then it would take it to the max and then it would kill it.
And so instead, what we're doing.
Instead, we're trying to keep a constant on it, because what happens is it kills it for a while. Well, then that wind turbine slows down and you're not going to get that constant charge into
inefficient.
And then maybe the wind dies off just a bit as you're needing it. And then, and so it becomes a lot more efficient by limiting how much energy it can, and then after it gets past the 16th point on the curve, then it can produce basically wide open. I mean, if the wind's there, it can produce wide open. But on those lower wind speeds, that's where that's so crucial is to have that.
All right. So if you're in a high wind situation and your voltage is getting up, and so it hits this 230, so can it not just adjust the amps to be able to take?
It has adjusted the amps all the way up. At that point, it no longer can do any more amperage. It's kind of got to because our turbines never stop increasing on voltage. They will go to the moon. They just would, or burn up.
Okay. So when it's approaching 230 volts, it's adjusting the amperage all along the way to decide what it can.
Yeah, at a certain point, it's putting out as much amperage there again as it can because it's only capable of putting out so many amps.
And then is that when we dump to the resistor?
And that's when we say, okay, we need to hit the resistor bank over here. We need to hit the VRD bank over here.
Okay.
And that's automatically going to be tripped off through the classic. It will automatically enact that. And what it does, it enacts about 900 watts worth of resistance. And
so what's the max amperage that we can take in?
The max amperage
is that looking at the batteries?
The max amperage on a 250 volt on the classic 250 is 72 amps.
Wow.
72 amps is the max amperage it has, which is a lot of amperage.
It's just a lot of amperage.
Yeah, that's a lot of amperage. But that is the max.
So is it looking at the batteries and saying, here's what the batteries can take?
Yes. And so there again, this would be in the scenario just coming out of the night where your batteries are depleted down to 50%. So they're in bulk stage. So they're in bulk charge stage. Once you hit absorb stage, that amperage is cut dramatically, almost by 90%. I mean, it really cuts it back. I mean, so you may have been getting 40 amps and all of a sudden you're getting 5 amps. And then it even cuts back even farther. Absorb stage only stays in for about a period of about an hour. And then once the batteries, like right now, today, for instance, at your house, super sunshiny day, if there was to be big wind, your solar panels are pretty much made up for it this morning. I mean, just because it's such a nice day out. And so immediately it would go back into float stage. And float stage, it's only ever going to give 1 to 2 amps. That's all. I mean, no matter how much wind there is, that's all it's ever, because that's all the batteries need. And so a lot of people, when they're looking at our wind turbines and they have the nice controller, that's what you got to be looking at is what stage are you in? If you're in float stage, don't ever expect more than 2 amps. 2 to 3 amps ever, because it's never going to do that. It's designed that way because what it's trying to do is top off the batteries that last 2 to 3%. That's all it's made to do. And so that's where a lot of people, and then some people will say, well, I don't have that nice controller. I have the problem with there is not having the nice controller. It is not a problem. It's just, they're a lot less inefficient. So when it ramps up to the 230 volts that it can do, or 240 volts it can do, the problem is it's with the inefficiencies on a bulk charger, it's only coming through usually at the same amperage rated. So a lot of times it'd only be like 5, 6, 7 amps. And
it's always going to protect.
Right.
And so it can never take advantage of it.
It can never take advantage of all that wattage that's being produced on it, but that's on the high end. Most people are always trying to deal on the lower end of the scale, the 10, 15 mile an hour, and they do great in that because they're designed that way.
All right, so let me take this into a similar vein and help me understand something. All right, so you've got your MPPT that's looking at that and controlling that. Then if that's the case, what is the difference if we're looking at 12 versus 24 versus 48 volt in an actual wind turbine? So we have the 12, 24, 48 volt wind turbine. If voltage is going to be whatever,
right,
then why do we class them as 12, 24, and 48?
Because of the RPM rate. So at a 12 volt at 266 RPMs will produce 12 volts. It will actually produce 12 volts in the voltage. A 24 volt PMG and a 48 volt PMG likewise at 266 RPMs will produce 48 or 24 volts. So if you have a 48 volt bank and you had a 12 volt PMG, it would take approximately about 600 RPMs to ever achieve up to 48 volts. But it could, and it will, because that's what we use 12 volt turbines for all of our hydro because they have a bigger wire size. It's all in the wire sizing. And not just wire sizing, but in the wire length.
Right. But I guess what I'm getting at here is the wind curve different for?
Yes. Wind curves would be different from 12 to 24 to 48.
Okay. So basically, could you tell the system that it was, even though it was a 12 volt rated, you could tell it was a 48 volt?
Yeah. Yeah, you could. And it's just, there again, it's going to take a little bit faster RPM to get up to that once it did. So say you were in a very high wind area, maybe Wyoming, somewhere like that, base of the mountains. You could at that point use a lower voltage turbine to still achieve charging your higher voltage battery bank. And we even have a new controller out now. It's called the CBSU Smart Boost. It actually only uses 12 volt turbines because it actually has a boost function in it. So whereas the MPPT can go down, right? MPPT is designed to take high voltage and take it down to the voltage of your battery bank and then increase the amperage. Well, this thing, let's say it comes in at 12 volts, it can boost up to the 48 volt battery bank There again, you're going to achieve lower amperage while doing that, but it can actually boost it up. So you don't have to have that 266 RPMs to actually achieve, or you don't have to have that higher RPMs to achieve a charge on a 48 volt bank. Why do we do that? One is because the controller is designed for lower voltage input. That's one of the reasons why. The other reason we do that is it allows, this particular one has a wind track function in it that it self-learns. On the 12 volt stators versus a 48 volt stator, the wire size diameter is about twice as thick. Okay, so it's a lot thicker wire size. So if I start producing a lot of heavy amperage, that's where I need that heavier wire size. And so I can use my 12 volt turbine and not take any risk of actually burning up my wire, my stator wire, getting too hot, too much amperage pushing through that. So that's one of the reasons we do that. But it's a new controller that we just have out. We've only had it out about 3 weeks now. It's a great controller. We've had a lot of beta testing here at the store with it, and it's a great controller. It's going to change the way that we charge lithium batteries because it is still an MPPT style function. So it can actually boost it down. Let's say that the wind did pick up high, right? And you started getting 30 mile an hour wind where you're getting the 90, 100, and 120 volts into the unit. It can still buck it back down too. It's a boost and a buck controller. So one of the only controllers on the market right now that actually can do the boost function though.
Okay. So just coming back full circle, you cannot just look at a wind turbine's amperage
No.
and make a determination as to success or failure.
Yeah. That's 100% the case. You cannot just look at the amperage of, that would be like looking at the amperage on the side of your stove and saying, okay, well, it says it uses 11 amps, and then never taking the voltage into account. And so you start designing all your wire in your home for that. Well, 11 amps, well, that can run on a 14 gauge wire, and it still could, but it would be saying, okay, well, then it's only going to pull somewhere around 1100 watts. Well, if you didn't look at the voltage on the side of it to see that it was 240 volts, you're dead wrong. I mean, it's going to pull twice the amount of energy that you thought it was. I mean, so if you don't have the other side of the equation, if you only look at amperage and you don't look at the voltage, you're just looking at, it's like having a math equation and saying 2 times X equals 8. By the math, we can do that. But unfortunately, when you say 2 times X equals
X,
there's no way to come up with the answer of that. You don't have two portions of the equation, So you have to have both of those.
And even that is not just a one-to-one, because if I understand right, is that then you have to know what the state of those batteries are.
That's correct. There's so many variables, and people sometimes get frustrated with us when we won't just come out with an answer because there's so many variables. Not only the state of the batteries, what battery chemistry they are.
Right.
There is so many variables that go into it that it's almost impossible to tell you on a day-to-day basis of what in the world your turbine should be producing. Overall, we can kind of give you a generalization what it should be producing, but that's about all we can. All we can do.
And that's the reason we rely on like the midnight.
Because it actually
do that. For us.
It actually does that for us.
And is always maximizing.
Maximizing the efficiency from the turbine.
Okay. All right. Excellent. I think now we can take a link to this podcast and respond to so many.
And really overall, and anything in the renewable energy field, not just solar, but definitely in turbines, what we're concerned about is the overall wattage output. We don't care about the voltage output. We don't care so much about the amperage output. How many watts is it putting into your battery bank? That is, and as a consumer and as the end user, that's all you should be concerned about as well, because the same deal, just because you should be able to figure out what your appliances are using. And so if you like a refrigerator, for instance, uses 1,500 watts per day, that's the average that, when I get my electric bill, I don't look at it never tells me how many amps that I use throughout the month. It tells me how many watts I use throughout, how many kilowatts that I use throughout the month. So that's what everybody should be concerned in, is the wattage the turbines produce, the solar produces, what your appliance uses, everything. That's what you should be concerned about, is wattage. So.
Okay. All right. I think we can put that one in the books and remind everybody that We're going to use this link on them in
There you go.
the Facebook pages and all. So thanks for checking us out. Thank you for downloading and listening to the podcast today. If you have a question you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast, or just want to say hello, email us at radio@windandsolar.com. As always, check out our store at windandsolar.com and buy some stuff. Your financial support underwrites our educational outreach, like the podcast, YouTube channel, and local STEM collaboration. It also keeps Lucy and her doggy chicken treats. Thanks again for listening.